My name is Aaron. I live in a house filled with someone else's memories. Every creaking floorboard, every photo frame tucked into the corners of dusty shelves. They don't belong to me. They belong to her. Claire. His first love. His only love. His dead love. When people see us at dinner parties or church functions, they call us the Thompsons. Smiling, nodding, asking when we'll finally take that trip to the coast. I always smile back. He doesn't. He just places a hand on my back like it's part of the show, like I'm an umbrella he remembered to bring out of obligation. We've been married for 10 years now. 10 years of side glances. 10 years of trying to win a man who never wanted to be won. He married me a year after Claire died. Car accident. No one's fault, they said. A slippery road, a patch of fog. She was gone before she even had time to brace for impact. She was only 29. I was the sweet church girl, who made him casseroles in his morning, who mowed his lawn when he forgot the world existed. Somewhere between thank you notes and fragile conversations, we got engaged. But it wasn't love. Not for him. For me? I don't even know what it was. Maybe guilt. Maybe pity. Maybe I thought, stupidly, that if I just gave him enough time, if I stayed long enough, cooked enough, smiled enough, he'd look at me like he used to look at her. He never did. Sometimes I catch him staring out the window, his wedding ring clinking gently against the coffee mug. His eyes always go to the same spot, the tree in the backyard. Claire planted it. A young dogwood. Now it's tall and strong, its pink blooms daring me to forget who they came from. He used to sit under it with a book, barely saying a word. When I brought him lemonade, he'd nod. That was it. No kiss, no smile. Just a nod. Like I was the maid. And I still stayed. I washed his clothes. I made his favorite meals. Well, her favorite meals, actually. I learned them from her old blog that I found one day while cleaning out the attic. Claire's Kitchen, it was called. Filled with cheerful photos and cursive titles like Sunday Morning Cinnamon Buns and Elliot's Favorite Chili. Yes, Elliot. That's my husband. The man who held Claire's hand through college, who built this house with her dreams, who buried her with trembling hands, and then married me with cold ones. One day, about 5 years in, I finally asked. We were driving back from his brother's house, stuck in late traffic, the radio playing something sad and wordless. I turned to him and asked, "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" His jaw tightened. He didn't look at me. He just said, "It's not about regret. It's about acceptance." I didn't know what that meant. I still don't. But I never asked again. The real ache, though? It wasn't just his indifference. It was that the world kept reminding me who I wasn't. At church, Mrs. Landry once said to me, "Claire used to sing in the choir, too. You remind me of her. But your voice is more timid." At the grocery store, an old friend of his, Tom something, mistook me for Claire and nearly burst into tears. Even his mother, sweet as she tried to be, never forgot to remind me. "Claire would have loved these lilies. You should plant some out front, dear." She always wanted that. So I did. I planted her flowers. I cooked her meals. I lived in her house. I loved her husband. And every single night, when I slipped into bed next to Elliot, I felt like a guest waiting to be asked to leave. Then came the letter. It arrived in a box from the attic. I was clearing out old things, hoping to make the guest room less of a museum and more of a space. It was buried under a stack of old journals and photo albums wrapped in velvet ribbon. The envelope was yellowed, sealed with wax. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was addressed to Elliot, but written by Claire. I didn't read it. Not then. I couldn't. Something told me it wasn't meant for me. I placed it back in the box, sealed it tight, and slid it under our bed. But that night, when Elliot came home late, smelling of whiskey and melancholy, I asked him if he knew it was there. He looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. "What letter?" My throat dried. "From Claire. In the attic. For you." He paled. He didn't ask to see it. He just stood there, silent, staring. Then he walked into the kitchen, poured another glass of something strong, and sat in the dark for hours. That was the first time I saw fear in his eyes. But it wouldn't be the last. Because what I didn't know then, what no one knew, was that Claire didn't just leave behind a grieving husband. She left behind a secret. And it was about to destroy everything. I couldn't sleep after that night. Elliot hadn't touched the letter, hadn't even acknowledged it again. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would Claire write him a letter he never received? Why hide it in the attic, tucked away like a ghost note to the man she left behind? The next morning, I made his coffee as usual. He came down, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't closed them all night. He didn't mention the letter. He didn't say anything. Just a grunt of thanks before he stepped out the front door and disappeared into the early fog. I stood there in the kitchen, the scent of black coffee floating between us like a wall, and knew I couldn't keep pretending. Something was rotting in this house. And it wasn't just the past. That afternoon, I pulled the box from under the bed and opened it again. The letter sat there, innocent, sealed, threatening. I stared at it for a long time before finally peeling it open. The paper inside was delicate, like tissue, her handwriting curling across the page like ivy. It read, "Elliot, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There's something I never told you. I wanted to, God knows I did. But I was scared you'd look at me differently. I didn't want your love to become pity. I lied about something. About someone. There's more. So much more. I just need you to forgive me. Even if you can't understand why I did what I did. Start with the journal. The red one. You'll find it in the back of the closet, behind the shoeboxes. Claire." I sat frozen. A chill crawled up my spine. She lied? Claire, who everyone had painted like a saint wrapped in sunshine and laughter, had lied to Elliot? About someone? And there was a journal. I don't know what came over me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe survival instinct. But I ran upstairs, pulled everything out of our closet. Behind the shoeboxes, exactly where she said, was a slim red leather-bound journal. It smelled like dust and memory. I sat on the floor and opened it, half expecting it to combust in my hands. The entries started innocently enough. Day trips, recipes, notes about their new home. But 10 pages in, things shifted. Elliot is everything I dreamed of marrying. But I keep thinking about the night in Charleston. About Mark. We said it would be just one night. That it wouldn't mean anything. But I think about him more than I should. I know what I did was wrong. I just didn't expect to feel anything for someone else. But Mark listened to me in a way Elliot hasn't in months. It's like I disappeared from our marriage long before that night ever happened. Mark. Who was Mark? My stomach turned as I flipped through more pages. More confessions. More moments that painted a different Claire. A lonely Claire. A Claire I could finally see as human. And then near the very end, another entry that hit like a brick. If anything ever happens to me, Mark needs to know about the baby. I dropped the journal. A baby? A man named Mark? Claire had an affair and a child? I felt like the walls were closing in. My chest tightened. This wasn't the story I had been told. This wasn't the flawless Claire everyone mourned. I looked around the house, her house, and it suddenly felt smaller, like I was sitting in a stranger's memory. My head spun with questions. Did Elliot know? Had he suspected anything all along? Was that why he never let go of her? Not because he loved her too much, but because she broke him in ways I never knew? I couldn't ask. Not yet. But I also couldn't carry it alone. I called the only person who might know something. Claire's sister, June. We hadn't spoken much over the years. She was cold to me at first, clearly resenting that I married her sister's widower. But time softened her, and lately, she even smiled when we ran into each other. I invited her to coffee. Neutral ground. We sat at a small cafe on 5th Street. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and her voice dropped low when I brought up the letter. Her hands froze around her mug. "You found it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You knew?" I whispered back. She nodded. "Claire made me promise not to say anything unless you or Elliot ever asked. I didn't think you'd ever find it." I swallowed hard. "Who's Mark?" Her face crumpled slightly. "Her college friend. They reconnected a year before the accident. He lived out of state. I never met him. But Claire told me she saw him a few times. I didn't know about the baby." I closed my eyes. The world tilted again. I left the cafe feeling like I was carrying a secret that didn't belong to me, and yet somehow had everything to do with me. Back home, Elliot wasn't in the living room. I heard the back door creak, and when I looked out the window, he was sitting under Claire's dogwood tree again. I watched him from behind the curtain, the journal clutched in my hand, my heart pounding. I knew that if I told him, it could shatter what little was left between us. But I also knew, this was the moment the truth had to rise. The past wasn't dead. It was alive and breathing, buried under roots and silence. And something told me the worst was yet to come. I waited until after dinner. Elliot sat across from me, his fork moving through his food without focus, his eyes fixed on some distant place in his mind. He barely said a word. He never did. But I had to break the silence. I placed the red journal on the table between us. Gently, deliberately. He looked at it, then at me. A pause stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. "What's that?" he finally asked. "It's Claire's. From the attic." He didn't move. His hands tightened slightly around his fork, then relaxed. "You read it." I nodded. Another pause. His jaw clenched. "Then you know." It wasn't a question. He didn't look shocked. Or angry. He just looked tired. "About Mark. And the baby," I said softly. He exhaled through his nose, closed his eyes. For a second I thought he might cry. But no. Not Elliot. That wasn't something he let himself do in front of me. "I found the letter too," I continued. "The one she wrote to you." "She wrote it a week before the crash," he said quietly. "I never saw it. Never knew it existed. Until you said something." I studied him. "Did you suspect anything before she died?" His eyes stayed on the journal. "Not until the funeral." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He finally looked up. There was a man. Tall. Dark jacket. Stayed at the back. Didn't speak to anyone. But when the service ended, I saw him staring at her casket like the world had just ended. I asked June about him. She went pale and said she didn't know. But I think she did. I think it was him. "Mark." Elliot nodded. I tried to forget about it. I wanted to keep my memory of her clean. I wanted to believe she was who I thought she was. He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the tree Claire had planted. "You know what the worst part was?" he whispered. "Not that she lied. Not even that she was with someone else. It's that I still loved her after knowing." I didn't know what to say. For years I'd been trying to get scraps of affection from this man. But now I realized, he hadn't been giving me scraps. He had nothing left to give. Claire took it all. And I had been living with a shell of a man too stubborn to grieve honestly. "I never hated you, Aaron," he said suddenly. I flinched. He had never said that before. Never not said it either. I was angry. At her. At myself. At God. "You were just close enough to get burned." "I stayed," I whispered. "I stayed through everything." "I know," he said. "And I don't know why." That night, I lay awake while he slept beside me for once, not on the couch or in his office. And for the first time in a long time, he reached out for my hand under the sheets. He didn't say anything. Just held it. But I didn't feel comforted. Because something still didn't make sense. The journal ended abruptly. No mention of whether the baby had been born. No note about whether Elliot ever found out. Just that one cryptic line. "Mark needs to know about the baby." If Claire had died before telling him, then where was the child? Did they even exist? I needed answers. And so the next morning, I did something desperate. I looked up every Mark connected to Claire's old college. Sifted through social media profiles, alumni forums, anything I could find. It took hours, but eventually, I found a man named Mark Garrison. Photographer. Lived in Oregon. He had followed Claire's blog a decade ago. His most recent post was of a teenage girl holding a vintage camera, smiling awkwardly. The caption read, "Can't believe my little M turned 13 today. You have your mother's spirit, kid." My blood turned cold. I clicked deeper into his page. Years' worth of photos flooded the screen, some clearly Claire's style. Others hinted at a shared past. It hit me all at once. Claire had the baby. She just never told Elliot. Mark had raised her. A daughter. Her name was M. I printed out a few photos and tucked them into the journal. I didn't tell Elliot. Not yet. He was still raw. Still sitting with the truth that his perfect wife had been imperfect in ways that scarred him. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Because 3 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. It was addressed to Elliot. I handed it to him as he sat on the back porch. He opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper. Dear Elliot, I know you don't know me. I don't even know if my mom ever told you about me. But she used to talk about you sometimes, always with kindness. She said you were the kind of man who held the weight of the world in silence. My name is Emerson. I think I'm your daughter. He didn't say a word. Just sat there. I watched the color drain from his face. His hands trembled. Elliot, I said cautiously. He stood up and walked inside, closing the door behind him. I could hear drawers slamming, paper rustling, footsteps back and forth. Then the sound of his car engine roaring to life. He was gone before I could even get off the porch. I stood there, clutching the letter, staring at the dogwood tree as the wind shook loose a few pink blossoms. My heart was racing. Because this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He didn't come home that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand, my eyes reading the same lines over and over until the words blurred into nothing. A part of me wanted to call the police, to track his phone, to scream out into the night. But the larger part of me knew. This was a journey he had to take alone. I just didn't know where it would lead. Or if he'd come back the same. The next morning, June showed up at my door. Her eyes were red, her hair tied up in a messy bun like she hadn't slept either. I need to talk to you, she said. I let her in. No questions. We sat in the living room, sunlight pouring over Claire's old bookshelf. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she stared at the fireplace as if it held the answer to a question neither of us had fully asked. She told me about Emerson, June said softly. After she was born. She called me from the hospital and begged me not to tell anyone, not even Elliot. Why? I asked. Why keep something like that from him? Because she was scared, June whispered. She didn't know who the father was. I froze. What do you mean? June's eyes finally met mine. She wasn't sure if it was Mark's or Elliot's. The room tilted. Claire hadn't just lied. She had hidden the biggest truth of all, not only from Elliot, but maybe even from herself. She wanted to protect them both, June continued. She didn't want Elliot to raise a child that might not be his. And she didn't want Mark to feel like a thief. So she left. Told Mark the baby was his. Told Elliot she had a miscarriage. That was the last time she spoke of it. I sat back stunned. All these years, Elliot had mourned Claire like she was a perfect ghost. He had buried his love without knowing the whole story. And now, he might have a daughter he'd never met. Or maybe not. Everything was twisted. Unstable. June reached into her purse and handed me a photo. It was Claire, holding a baby wrapped in a pale pink blanket. She looked tired. Worn. But there was something else in her eyes. Regret, maybe. She mailed this to me before she died, June said. Said if anything ever happened to her, I'd know what to do. Why are you giving this to me now? I asked. Because I think Elliot's with them. With Mark. With Emerson. I didn't wait. I packed a bag, grabbed the printed map with Mark's address in Oregon, and got in my car. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee. My hands didn't stop shaking. Not from fear of the road, but from the uncertainty of what I'd find at the end of it. When I arrived, the sky was gray and threatening rain. I pulled up to a modest cabin on the edge of a pine forest. Wind chimes danced in the breeze, singing a song that felt oddly familiar. I parked the car and walked up the porch steps. The door creaked open before I even knocked. Mark stood there. Older than I expected. Weathered. Kind-eyed. He knew who I was. He's inside, he said. My breath caught. Elliot. Mark nodded. I stepped inside slowly, expecting confrontation. Anger. Accusation. Instead, I found Elliot sitting on the floor of the living room. A blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Next to him sat a girl, 13 or 14. Hair the color of chestnuts. Claire's eyes. They were talking quietly, like father and daughter. And in that moment I knew. He didn't need a paternity test. He felt it. He looked up when I entered. There were tears on his face, but his expression didn't hold shame or surprise. Just something softer. "We were just talking," he said. "She asked about her mom." I looked at Emerson. She smiled nervously, unsure of what I meant to her. Or what I meant to him. "She knows?" I asked. "Mark told her everything," Elliot said. "They waited until she was old enough to understand. But now she wanted to meet me. To know if the things her mom wrote in those letters were true." Claire had written to her, too. Dozens of letters, Mark explained. Every birthday. Every holiday. Letters filled with love and regret and longing. She wanted to come back, Mark said quietly. She wanted to tell the truth one day. But then the accident. We stayed the night. I slept on the couch. Not because I had to, but because I needed space. Needed to process. Elliot didn't force a conversation. He just sat with me on the porch as the sun rose, coffee in hand, eyes distant. "I think I always knew," he whispered. "Not about the baby, but that Claire wasn't the fantasy I kept alive in my head. I think I clung to her memory because it was easier than facing how broken we really were." "And what about us?" I asked. He turned to look at me. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." We drove back together, Elliot, Emerson, and me. The ride was quiet but not tense. Just heavy, like our hearts were trying to rearrange themselves. Elliot held Emerson's hand as she fell asleep in the back seat. I saw something change in him then, a weight finally lifting. But what that meant for us? Still unclear. All I knew was, the girl in the back seat was a living piece of the past. And maybe, the beginning of something new. The first week back home was delicate. The house felt different now. Not because the furniture had changed or the wind sounded any softer through the windows. But because she was here. Emerson. Claire's daughter. Maybe Elliot's. Maybe not. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. Blood couldn't rewrite what time had already built in those few days they spent together. She followed him everywhere. Not in a needy way. More like she was tracing the edges of a world that had always been kept from her. And Elliot? He softened. Subtly. Slowly. But it was there. I saw it in the way he smiled when she asked questions. In the way he remembered to bring her hot chocolate just the way she liked it. In the way he started saying goodnight to me, not with a kiss, but with acknowledgement. And somehow, that was almost enough. But for me, the cracks were still showing. I couldn't explain the heaviness in my chest every time I saw them together. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even sadness. It was fear. Fear that I didn't belong in this new version of our life. That I was just a placeholder in a family formed long before I arrived. One night, after Emerson had gone to bed and Elliot was in his study, I stood in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom. The one Claire had chosen the tiles for. And I stared at myself. 10 years. 10 years of being invisible in my own home. 10 years of fighting for love that never reached me. And now, with Claire's ghost alive in the eyes of a 13-year-old girl, I wondered, where do I go from here? The answer came sooner than I expected. It was a Thursday morning when I received the letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single page typed. "You don't know me. But I knew Claire. And I knew what she was going through. She told me things no one else knew. If you want the truth, the full truth, about her, about Emerson, about Elliot, meet me. Friday. 4 p.m. Glendale Park. Bring no one." It was unsigned. My first thought was that it was a prank. Some cruel trick. But my gut said otherwise. So I went. Glendale Park was empty that day. Clouds hung low in the sky. And the wind had the smell of rain on it. I sat on a bench near the lake, my coat pulled tight around me, heart pounding. 15 minutes passed. Then I saw him. A man in his 40s. Neatly dressed. Nervous eyes. He approached slowly. "You're Aaron?" he asked. I nodded. "Who are you?" "My name's Alan. I worked with Claire. Back when she was still writing that cooking blog. We were close." I said nothing. Just listened. "She came to me a few months before she died," he said. Said she was scared. That someone had found out about Emerson. Someone who wasn't supposed to. My heart stopped. She thought Elliot knew? I asked. He shook his head. No. She thought someone was threatening her. She never said who. Just that it had something to do with a financial matter. A trust, maybe. A document she said she signed without understanding it. I stared at him. Are you saying Claire didn't die in an accident? I'm saying, he said quietly, that she didn't trust the people around her at the end. And she told me if anything happened to her, I should find you. Me. He nodded. She knew Elliot wouldn't want to know the truth. But she believed you'd want it. I stood chest heaving. Do you know who threatened her? No. But I think it was someone close. Maybe family. Maybe someone who stood to gain from her death. But I have copies of the documents. You should see them. He handed me a small folder. Inside were bank statements, trust fund forms, and a note with Claire's handwriting. The words were shaky. If anything happens to me, this wasn't an accident. Don't trust everyone. Not even the ones who say they loved me. I drove home in silence. The wind was picking up. Trees bending. A storm coming. And inside me another one. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure I knew Elliot at all. Had Claire discovered something about him in those final days? Could he have known about Emerson and done nothing? Or worse, that night, I didn't sleep. I watched him from across the room, wondering if he knew I knew something more now. He caught my eye and walked over slowly. You okay? He asked, voice soft. I nodded. Leet. He hesitated. Then said, Emerson's birthday is next week. She asked if we could have something small here. Of course, I said. This is her home now too. He smiled at that. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. The next day, I went back to the attic. Looking for anything. Everything. And I found something, taped to the underside of a drawer in Claire's old desk. A small voice recorder. Dusty. Old. I clicked play. Her voice crackled through the speaker. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get the chance to fix what I broke. I lied to Elliot. I lied to Mark. But not because I didn't love them, I did. In different ways. But there was someone else. Someone who found out about Emerson and told me to stay quiet. Told me if I ever revealed the truth, there'd be consequences. I never thought it would go this far. I thought I had more time. I'm sorry. The recording ended. My hand trembled. Who was she talking about? What consequences? The image of the man at the funeral came back to me. Tall. Cold. Staring. I needed answers. But more than that, I needed to know if I was still safe in this house. With Elliot. The next morning, I woke to find the front door ajar. It was early, still gray outside, the kind of dawn that feels like it's holding its breath. Elliot was in the backyard, standing beneath the dogwood tree Claire had planted. He looked small somehow, his shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets like a boy waiting to be scolded. I watched from the kitchen window, the recorder still in my pocket. The storm in me had reached its peak. It was time. I stepped outside slowly, the grass still wet with dew. He didn't turn to face me. I know about the recorder, I said. His shoulders tensed. Still he didn't move. I know Claire was scared before she died. I know someone was threatening her. I know about the trust. About Emerson. I know everything. Finally he turned. His face looked older than I'd ever seen it. Like the years had caught up to him overnight. She recorded that the day before the crash, he said quietly. I found it 2 days later. After the funeral. I didn't want to believe it. Who was she talking about? I asked. He looked at me. Really looked. My brother. I blinked. Jacob. He nodded. Claire told me once, he said, voice low, that Jacob had offered to help her invest some of her inheritance. Said he had a financial firm starting up. She signed a few papers. Didn't think much of it. He paused, swallowed hard. When I found the voice recorder, I confronted him. He laughed. Said Claire was emotional. That she didn't understand the business. But you believed her. I didn't want to, but yes. Did you? My voice faltered. Did you think he had something to do with her death? I don't know. The police said it was an accident. Slick roads. But Jacob was in town that day. Said it was for work. But he never came to the funeral. Never called me after. Not even once. We stood in silence, the weight of it all pressing between us. Then I said the words that had been living in my chest for weeks. I need to know. Elliot, all these years, was I just a placeholder for her? His eyes glistened. I don't know what you were at first, he said. But you weren't a placeholder. He stepped closer, took a long breath. You were the only person who didn't ask me to be anything other than broken. You stayed. You were kind. Always. That's not love. It wasn't. Not then. His voice cracked. But it is now. Tears stung my eyes. After all the years of silence, of scoffs, of being less than a memory, he was finally standing in front of me. Not as Claire's husband. Not as Emerson's maybe father. But as a man who was ready to admit the damage he'd caused. And own it. I don't know if we can fix everything, I whispered. I'm not asking for that, he said. I'm just asking to try. The following week, Emerson's birthday came. It was small, just the three of us in June. Balloons. Cake. A photo of Claire placed gently beside the candles. Emerson smiled shyly as she opened her gifts. Her laughter finally filling the house with a kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. After everyone left, she stayed behind to help me clean. Do you think my mom would have liked it here? She asked. I knelt beside her. I think she'd be proud of you. And of how strong you are. She looked up. Are you and my dad going to stay together? I paused. I think we're finally learning how to start. That night, I walked into the bedroom and found Elliot packing away Claire's things. Quietly. Gently. No ceremony. He looked up. It's time. I nodded. Yeah, it is. Weeks passed. We went to the police with the documents from Alan, the recordings, everything. Jacob was investigated, but without a smoking gun, nothing came of it. Still he knew we knew. And that was enough. He never came near us again. And then spring came. The dogwood tree blossomed more brightly than ever. Pink petals blanketed the lawn like a blessing from a woman who had finally let go of the life she'd left behind. One afternoon, I found Emerson beneath it, writing in a notebook. I sat beside her. She looked up and smiled. I think I want to start a blog. Like Mom's. What will you call it? She thought for a moment. Maybe. Second Roots. I smiled. Because that's what we were now. Not replacements. Not shadows. But something new. Something real. The end.